Good morning and good afternoon. Hope everyone can hear me okay. All right, I see everything. All right, the star is here, the real talent. That's good. Do you want to bring up the slides, Emerson?
I shall. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep, I see it. I hope everyone on the webinar can see it as well. We're really happy to be doing this webinar. This is the first one that we've done as a joint webinar in two different locations. I'm here in Peru, Emerson's in Seattle. We're really excited for this webinar. I think it should be some great content. I think a lot of you may know me. I'm John Kelvie. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bespoken. Really happy to be joined here by Emerson Sklar. He has recently joined our company, Bespoken, as our chief evangelist, coming from Applause, where he led their voice services. And it's great to have Emerson here. He's a very technically astute guy, and he also has a great knack for explaining complex things, I would say, in very clear terms. So for me, I really appreciate that. I'm really looking forward to at last really understanding how this automated testing thing works. So Emerson, it's just great to have you on board, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, John, thank you very much. Nice to see everybody on the line today. Like John mentioned, my name is Emerson Sklar. I'm the chief evangelist of Bespoken, and I'm extremely excited to talk to you just how easy it is to really get started with voice automation.
Well, that's fantastic. So then just some of our standard housekeeping items. You'll see that we have a few tabs on the right-hand side there. One of those is our polls. We have some questions there. We really appreciate your responses to those questions. They're really helpful for us in formulating our product roadmap and understanding what our customers need. We really appreciate the feedback that you provide to us and really do pay attention to it. So please do answer those polls. Additionally, you'll see there's a question as well as a chat section. One nice thing about us doing this together, Emerson's going to be doing most of the hard work here. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on the questions in the chat, and I'm going to try to work in any questions that you guys have into our conversation as we're going through. So we do mean for this to be participatory. Just look forward to your questions as we're going along. Our goal is that, after 60 minutes, you're really coming out of this with a great understanding of how to do automated testing. So, please do ask us to clarify anything that we're not doing a good job explaining. And then lastly, this session is being recorded. So you will get that recording as well as the slides after we're done here. You can just kind of relax. No need to take a lot of screenshots. You'll get all the materials that we have once we're done. And so with that, Emerson, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Yeah. Again, welcome to a crash course in test automation. Like John mentioned, we're excited to show you just how easy it is to get started, how significant a time and effort return on your investment you can gain from implementing this type of solution, and how literally in less than 60 minutes you can begin realizing those advances and actually get started with your own internal test automation. So first things first, in terms of an agenda, first we're going to discuss kind of the state of the voice market today, talk about where some companies are struggling in their voice development practices. Then we're going to talk about Bespoken, who we are, why we're so confident that automated testing is an absolutely essential and vital part of developing voice apps. And then I'm actually going to walk you through test setup and execution from square one, installing the tools, creating your first unit and end-to-end tests, and enhancing them to broaden your coverage and both of your code and of your app's functionality. Finally, we're going to talk about some of the more advanced testing concepts, things that will really help ensure that you optimize the performance of your voice apps and are delivering 5-star high-quality voice experiences. So let's take a look at the marketplace. Adobe released a fantastic report in May where they interviewed over 400 executive-level business decision makers at enterprise companies all over the world. And what they found really reinforces, I think, all of our belief that voice is here to stay. 91% of them said that they're already making significant investments in voice today, due in part that even more of them recognize that voice is something that their customers expect their brand to have. In addition, given that investment, over 90% of enterprises are planning on releasing a voice app in the next 1 to 2 years. So the market is clearly primed, but it's obviously not all rosy. Despite most enterprises planning to release something in the future, only 1 in 5 of them have actually released a voice-enabled product to the market today. And more concerningly, more than 40% of skills that people have created are used once and then completely abandoned by the individuals. And although users aren't regularly rating the skills that they use, very different from the web and mobile stores, the average rating in most of the categories on the app stores is below 3.5 stars. And so why is that? Why does that difference exist? Well, I think there are 3 big challenges that are unique to voice today that people are facing. So the first is that these are new, very complex waters that people are trying to navigate. Shifting your development away from the traditional paradigm of graphical user interfaces into the new paradigm of voice user interfaces is complex. It's not always well documented, and it represents a type of technology that people and development teams just don't have a whole lot of experience with. Similarly, testing it is challenging and tedious. All your interactions can only occur as quickly as you can speak them and then listen to and interpret the results. And that's far slower than if you're just tapping a button on a GUI or you're typing into a web interface. And so the result of this is the classic bane of development and testing teams. It shifts your schedules far to the right, it delays your releases, and it results in an increasing workload that just can't be solved by adding more bodies to the team. The second challenge is that the characteristics of people's voices is fundamental to their experience with a voice app. And so similarly, a manual tester's ability to truly exercise that functionality and understand how it's actually going to perform in the hands of their real users is pretty limited. Brett Kinsello, the founder and editor of VoiceBot, has a quote that I love. He says that everyone's thumbs are the same, but everyone's voices are different. And the significance of that on your development team really can't be understated. And so an example, like I can read and write French pretty well, but my spoken French is abysmal. And so although I could write a skill that has a French VUI, I'm really going to struggle to effectively test it the same way that Alexa is going to struggle to understand what it is that I'm trying to say. The result of that is poor quality voice apps, bad or non-existent reviews in the marketplace, and experiences that really don't perform in your users' hands the way that you would expect them to in the lab, and they don't accurately reflect the quality and reputation of your brand. The third challenge that we see is that these are AI-driven platforms that are constantly changing and growing. And so some of that change is introduced by the platform itself, the fact that it is AI-driven, and then we as humans don't have a ton of insight into what's going on. Some of that change is introduced by the platform manufacturers themselves, and often the manufacturers don't really provide a ton of detailed information about what types of changes they're introducing. And so unlike in web and mobile, where you can be reasonably assured that the app that you release is going to perform the same today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, at least until the next major OS revision, you really don't have any idea in voice how your voice app's going to perform even just a few days or a few weeks from now. So you might have a 5-star voice app today, but it might perform like a 1-star voice app next week. And so all of that combines to introduce significant uncertainty to your voice roadmap. And so those exact challenges are why Bespoken was created, and they're really the pain points that our solution lets you easily and rapidly alleviate. Implementing this type of automation, ideally early in the life cycle, but even if you're doing it very late in the life cycle, lets you achieve much faster releases, which also means much cheaper releases. It gives you much greater insight into the current quality of your voice apps, and provides an easily consumable mechanism to fine-tune and optimize those voice apps. And then it additionally lets you future-proof your apps against changes in the voice ecosystem, which significantly reduces the ongoing maintenance and ensures you're always trending towards greater and greater, ultimately optimal voice quality. I mentioned earlier that 91% of enterprises are making significant investments in voice, and a solution like this really is the best way to protect that investment and ensure that your team is ultimately successful and that your customers are delighted. So who's Bespoken? Well, we're the global leaders in voice automation with a suite of testing and monitoring tools that help you perfect your voice experiences. We're the sole automation vendor who's endorsed by both Amazon and Google, and we're used across an extraordinary swath of organizations and businesses across the voice space, with over 1,000 apps being monitored and over 6,000 active developers using our tools. We're a small team. We're globally distributed across Seattle, Washington, D.C., and Peru. We're extremely passionate, not only about automated testing and voice, but about the impact that a solution like this can have on a growing industry. And the way that we approach this is that we have individual different tools that help to try and solve some of the challenges that each of your teams might be facing. And so we're actually going to walk through each of these individual tools. The first one that we're going to start off, though, is actually getting the tools set up and installed on your system. So fortunately, it's very, very easy. I already have them installed on my machine today that I'm going to be demoing to you, but there's really only 2 steps that you need to do. The first is you need to install Node.js, and Node.js provides prepackaged installers for Windows and for Macintosh, and you can do it on the command line as well. But you can just follow that link, go and install Node.js. It also comes with NPM, which is a very handy package manager. And using NPM, that's how you can install the Bespoken tools. And so it really is as simple as just typing in npm install bespoken-tools, -g makes it global for each of the users that are on your system. And depending on how you have your system set up, if it's Windows or a Linux-based system, you may have to either run it from an administrator prompt on Windows or run it with a sudo command on a Linux-based system, depending on how you have the permissions set up. So that whole process takes about as long as it took me to explain it to actually get them set up and installed. So where do we start? The easiest place to start is the unit testing. So the unit testing ultimately makes sure that your code, that the individual units and individual pieces of your code actually work correctly. And so it enables developers to actually test their code without ever having to deal with the voice ecosystems. So one of the pain points of writing for voice is that sometimes you have to do a lot of work before you can actually push that code up into Alexa or up to Google. And this enables you to shift that testing very, very far left to where you've actually even just begun. Maybe you've never even interacted with those voice platforms. It enables you to ensure before you get to that stage, which is much slower, much more tedious, that it actually works locally on your machine. And the way that we do that is that we actually emulate the requests that you'd be sending and receiving back and forth from Alexa or Google Assistant locally on your machine, and those requests interact directly with your local code base. So you don't have to worry about, like I mentioned, having that plumbing set up, having any of the connectivity working. It all runs locally on your machine, again, making it quite a bit faster and easier. It also works with a number of online code coverage tools, things like codecup.io. We actually have it integrated with the local code coverage tool that I'll show you kind of how that works as well. So let's see how this works in practice. So I'm going to switch over. I have Visual Studio Code here. You can use any kind of development environment you'd like. And I have 2 different skills that I'm going to be walking you through today. One is a llama fact skill that will tell you some fascinating facts about llamas. And one is a team lookup that actually provides details about different members of the Bespoken team. So we're going to start with the llama facts. And I actually have, I don't know if you can see it back there, I have a handy Facebook portal. So we can see if it works. I can say, hey, Alexa, open llama facts. Looks like I didn't hear it. Hey, Alexa, open llama facts. Third time's a charm. Alexa, Open llama facts.
Here's your fact. Llamas can weigh up to 200 kilograms.
It's a big llama. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to create a new unit test here. And we'll call this llama facts unit test. Each of the tests that we use uses a very simple YAML syntax. It's actually very similar between the unit test and the end-to-end test. And in fact, you can use the same type of syntax between them. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I need to tell it kind of what configuration to use. I need to tell it that this is an English skill in this case. So say configuration, ENUS for US English locale. And then I can actually begin writing my tests. And so again, this syntax is pretty easy. So if I want to define a new test, let's do a hello world example, essentially the simplest that a test could be. And that would be just doing a launch request. Launch request is that, that simple request that gets sent when you ask it to open a new skill. Now, what I'm doing here, I had mentioned is interacting with the code directly. So in this case, I'm not worrying about the ASR and NLU. I'm sending commands to try and exercise individual intents that I might have in my conversational model. So in this case, I just say launch request, and the response should be, here's your fact, and then it gives me some kind of fact. So that's about as simple as it could get. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'll open up a new terminal. And running these tests is very simple. I say BST for Bespoken tools. I say test to actually execute some tests. And then I point to where those tests are. And so those tests are in my test unit folder. And oh, interesting, the test failed. That's the joy of doing live demos. So if we try to look back at why it failed, it's actually pretty interesting. So I'm expecting it to say, here's your fact, H-E-R-E, like here is your fact. And it looks like in my conversational model, it looks like I have a typo here. I've got that it's here's your fact, like listening to a fact. So that's actually a pretty fascinating thing to demonstrate. So if let me go back to my code and try and find where that typo is. There's the typo. I've got here's your fact. So what I'm going to do, just to show how interesting this is, I'm going to fix it. And then I'm going to use the command line to deploy this code again up to Alexa. And at the same time, I'm going to run this unit test again. And let's see just how much time. Let's see if I can split these. There we go. So I'll give the Alexa deployment a head start. And I come back here. Let's try and run that test again. So my test is done already. It took 10 seconds for it to run that time. And the Alexa skill deployment deployed metadata, but it's still crunching along. It's going to take that. We'll come back to it in a few minutes, but it's going to take that deployment 5 minutes, 6 minutes to complete. I've immediately, just by being able to fix that typo that I had and verify locally on my machine without having to wait for Alexa to update, wait for the skill to actually be deployed. I've already been able to verify that it's going to work without all of that time wasted. So let's go ahead. We had while we wait for Alexa to catch up, we had a kind of a hello world type test, but let's make them a little more complex. So I've got a new test, and the way that I have this skill set up is that I can get a new fact directly. I can say, hey, ask llama facts for a new fact. So let's try that. Let's try it a different way. So it's the get new fact intent, and it should have the same result. Here's your fact. Go ahead and run that just to see. Hopefully that one works. Oh, and so the Alexa deployment just caught up finally. So great. Again, that took a few minutes for it to work. In that time, I've run the test several times again. I've actually broadened the tests a little bit, enabling me to get back some of that time that might otherwise be lost. So I've written this one. This one passed as well, which is good. Good, thankfully. And what we have here, I'm going to go ahead and close this little adjacent window. Let's go back. What we have here is actually an indication of the code coverage that's running. So if I scroll up, I can actually see that because I have it integrated with some automatic code coverage locally on my machine, I can see that in this case, it says that I've got 45% of all of my code is covered right now. I've got 70% of this one file and 0% of this other file. And that's kind of, that's kind of tough to really consume in that fashion. But we actually go and automatically generate some pretty nifty little reports for it. So if I come in here, I can take a look at this report. And so I can see in this case, okay, I had one test suite, which has 2 individual tests in it, has details about each of the tests and exactly how long they took, so that the tests themselves are pretty fast. But I can come up here and click on coverage, and I can see, in a much more easily consumed fashion, can see that exact data that I had before. But I can actually come in and see exactly what it is that's been covered. And so I can see, some of this I'm covering once, some of it I'm covering twice for each of them, and then some things like this help handler here, the exit handler. Some of these I'm not covering at all. And so that's really nifty. It's really helpful then to be able to go in and start to see, okay, from a unit testing perspective, like what areas of my code, what units have not actually been exercised today in one of those gaps. And that gives you kind of a hit list of new tests to start writing. So if I wanted to write, let's say I wanted to write something that exercises this help handler, I can just write a new test. Say test. We'll test I'm using the built-in Amazon.help intent, which just asks for help. And so I need to launch the skill. And what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to put any expected response. So previously, I was saying launch request, and it should say, here's your fact. I've got get new fact intent. I see here's your fact. In this case, we've already tested launch requests. We tested it previously in this exact same test. There's no reason to test it again. And there's kind of 2 ideas behind that. One is that if you had an extremely complex skill that had hundreds of intents, and you're going and duplicating, testing some of these intents over and over again, it will have some impact on the performance, on the execution speed of these individual tests. But in addition, it makes your tests much more fragile. It makes them much less maintainable. If I go and I make a change to the launch request, right now I only have to change the expected result here in one place. Whereas if I had the same kind of, launch request, here's your fact, launch request, here's your fact, if I had that in multiple places throughout my test, it just makes a lot of additional effort for me to maintain it and ensure that it's actually working, that's actually up to date. So I can just leave that. I'm not going to put a colon there. Just leave it blank. And I'm going to call the Amazon.help intent. Now, previously I was just calling the output, just calling the speech output that would be coming back from each of these individual skills, from each of these individual requests. But most people have some kind of multimodal interface, even if it's a fairly basic one. And so you're not limited to just testing the text that comes back. You can really test any of the pieces of the result that your web service might share. So if I want to go and broaden this a little bit, I can say, the response.output speech.ssml should be, you can say, tell me a lawn effect, or you can say exit, what can I help you with? So that's what the speech would say. I know that I don't have the card currently defined, so I can say response.card undefined. Let's say response.reprompt speech. The reprompt I currently have, what can I help you with? And then let's go ahead and add in even a third intent that we'll exercise. I want to exit, so we'll say, I think I call it session ended request. So that's like if I said exit or stop, I can say response.output speech. It's undefined. Shouldn't say anything. So I'll go ahead and run these tests. All right, so the test passed, and you can see that I'm up to now, oops, pasted all that in. You can see that I'm up to increased code coverage. If I actually come back here, previously we were at 70.8% coverage of this file. I'm just going to refresh it. Now we're at 87.5%. So you can see again by leveraging something like this, I can go in and ensure that at a very, very basic level that the code itself works, ignoring some of the complexity of the voice platform and the voice ecosystem there. So those are unit tests. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use. Again, very, very simple YAML syntax that you guys can really begin leveraging today by taking a look at your conversational model. So the next phase in the testing process, if we go kind of a level higher, is the end-to-end testing. And so unlike the unit testing where it's just interacting directly with your code base locally on your machine, the end-to-end testing ensures that the entire app ecosystem works correctly, that the code, once it's deployed into the voice platform, that everything works. And what this does is then it lets not only your developers, who were the people very likely interacting with the unit testing, it's not only the developers, but it lets your technical testers and your non-technical testers ensure that this voice ecosystem, as you have it deployed, actually works. And it's great that this lets you test. This lets you test much more effectively and much more frequently and accurately than if you're trying to manually test at the speed of humans. I mean, it really does perform. I've got 10x there. In many cases, it's upwards of 30 or 40x return on your testing time. So if I'm a manual tester and I'm trying to test a skill that my company is creating, I can write a test one time, I can say it one time, and test it one time, and I only get one set of results. But if I'm doing something like this, I write a test one time, and then I can test it an infinite number of times. I can test it forever at the click of a button, at the trigger of a continuous integration or continuous build tool. It really does make it much more efficient, the investment of time that you might spend actually creating these. And in addition, it broadens your ability as an individual developer, an individual tester, to test with audio characteristics that you personally simply couldn't do. So it can be a variety of native or non-native accents and pronunciations, individual background noises. I'll walk you through. In this case, we're actually using generated audio, but you can actually use pre-recorded audio. So if you have some type of large bank, if you've done some tests and captured audio from your users, you can actually use that as the basis of your end-to-end automated testing suite as well. Let's take a look at some end-to-end tests. So I'm going to leave this. Skill and come down to this team lookup one. Just to give you an idea of what the team lookup skill sounds like, what it does. Alexa, open Bespoken team lookup.
Welcome to Bespoken Team Lookup, where you can learn about the members of our team. For example, you can say, find an evangelist in Seattle.
Who is John Kelvie?
John Kelvie is founder and CEO, based out of Lima. You can say, tell me more, or tell me his GitHub username.
What is his Twitter handle?
John's Twitter is JPKBST. Would you like to find another team member? You can ask, who is Guy Borgford?
No.
Okay.
All right, so that's the Bespoken team lookup skill. Again, pretty simple skill, just gives some details about the members of our team. So I'm down in this other project that I've created. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new test here in this end-to-end test folder. So I'm gonna say new file, and we will call this team lookup end-to-end. And I'll say it's ENUS for English, dot end-to-end dot YAML. So this starts out very, very similarly to those unit tests that we had. So I need to provide some kind of configuration. So I'm going to say configuration. And the locale, we're going to do US English. And I need to tell it what kind of voice I want it to use. And so we support all of the Amazon Polly or all of the Google text-to-speech voices. And so you can actually just come down, and I've got the website here. If I take a look, there are a ton of them. There's just a ton in a whole bunch of different languages, a whole bunch of different characteristics, a lot of really fun ones you can play around with. So I would just come down here and pick one of these voice names. Alternatively, on the Amazon side, I pick one of these names or IDs. So we need a US English name. We've got US English. I'll pick Joey. So voice ID is Joey, and we're going to say that this is an end-to-end test. So now in this case, I'm not exercising the intents themselves. In this case, I'm actually getting real audio to be sent to these voice platforms and getting real responses sent back. And so writing these tests is much more conversational than if I were trying to interact with the code directly. So if I create a new test, again, I go test. Let's start with the hello world kind of thing again. So about skill. At its most basic, I just say open Bespoken team lookup. So you can see here, I'm really just telling it exactly what I as a user, I as a real human being would say to this skill. So let me open a new terminal here. Let's just run that one just to make sure it works. CD. Same thing, BST, test. I point to my tests, sort of the end-to-end folder. And this one is interesting. So because it is sending real audio to the platforms, and it's actually receiving real audio back from the platform and translating that back to text. They, as you can imagine, don't run as quickly as those unit tests would be. So if no matter what, if I'm trying to listen to a response from Alexa or listen to a response from Google, it's still going to say those responses at the speed of sound, at the speed of of their automatic voices. But again, I can go and write this and kick it off to run every minute or every 30 minutes or overnight or anything like that. I don't have to actually be sitting here just actively speaking to a device, saying the same thing over and over again to try and get the response. So good.
I'm causing some feedback, but Emerson, just to jump in with a question that we had there. Andre, I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly too there, but he asked, how can you run individual test suites or tests?
Sure. So in this case,
and I would just say,
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Well, so you're basically doing it there in the way you ran that test. We're filtering it down to the end-to-end test. You can put in a full file name to say just that test suite. Yep, exactly. And then one other feature I would highlight that not everybody knows is if you type in after the phrase test there, you can put in .only or .skip. And if you say .only, or sorry, in the actual test itself, in the test file there, if you put in .only, if we had 10 tests here, it would run only that test. And actually, if you put .only next to 3 tests, it would run just those 3 tests. And if you say .skip, it's going to skip that test. And that's a really helpful feature as you're going through and as you're writing tests. You know, a lot of times when I'm doing my own testing, I will just do .only on the one specific test that I want to pass, keep running that until it's fixed, then take it out, rerun the whole suite. And just one note, no space between the test and .only. So great question there. Happy to just kind of highlight those little features.
So we saw our essentially hello world, a very simple type of test pass. But let's walk through a little bit more of that scenario. So I had said last time I had invoked the skill and asked about John. So I can say open Bespoken team lookup, and then I want to say who is John Kelvie. And the response should be John Kelvie is founder and CEO based out of Lima. And let's see, it said you can say, tell me more, or tell me, had some other things, tell me his Twitter handle, which I think was the next one that I ran. So I'll go ahead and run that. Just make sure that one works. And while that one's running, let's take it then a step further, because again, a lot of skills, except for very simple skills, most skills aren't just open the skill, give one command, and then exit. A lot of them are multi-turn dialogues or have some contextual awareness that needs to be preserved. So in this one, I asked for John Kelvie, and it told me his details, and then I asked, what is his Twitter handle? So let's say is his Twitter. John's Twitter is JPKBST. If you'd like to find another team member, you can ask for some other stuff. Okay, good. So that previous one passed. You can see we're up to about 39 seconds, but again, the nice thing is I can write these and not have to worry about that delay. Now let's actually make this one. Let's use that capability that you just taught us about, John. We'll only execute that last skill that last test since we know the previous one's passed. And I guess while that's running, one thing to mention, I didn't call it out specifically, but we do support all sorts of different wildcards. You can actually do, you can very much manipulate the spoken responses or the spoken words as well as the results to make sure that it actually accurately reflects what needs to be said, the way that it needs to be said, and how the results are coming back. So I've got asterisks here. That means that there should be something afterwards, but I don't really care what it is. Because in this case, it'll say, you can tell me more, tell me his Twitter or his GitHub or something. Excuse me. Okay, so that one passed. That's great. So this is again, this is about as simple and basic as testing the functionality. That really is about all the functionality that's in that skill today. I could broaden it out and try and parameterize it to see about other team members and make sure that that everything works. But this skill is it only supports US English. the voice platforms understand my bizarre accent pretty well. So in this case, I could speak to it, even though it's going to take me a lot longer. I could speak to a smart speaker and kind of test it just as effectively as maybe these automated tests would be. But if I were a real company, if this were a real skill that I was going to be releasing, I wouldn't want to just ensure that I support people in the United States. I want to support people wherever my customers are. And so if we go back to that llama fact skill, I'll close these down. Go back to llama facts. I've actually already written a US English test right here. So I've written a US English test, again, very, very simple. It invokes it, says, here's your fact. There's a couple different ways I have built in to be able to ask for facts. I can say, ask llama facts for a fact, ask for some trivia, ask for some help. And I could, again, with my native accent, I could speak to a smart speaker and kind of test it about as effectively as that. But I mentioned previously that I can read and write French pretty well, but my spoken French isn't great. And so I couldn't really test. I have support for this skill in like a dozen languages. I couldn't really test it very effectively in French, but that doesn't mean that I can't write an automated test for it very effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste this. And let's rename it. We're no longer doing ENUS. Let's do FR-FR.
And Emerson, just a question that we had that came in, just where you're setting that up, from Leonard. He says, how do you recognize the audio from Alexa? Are you not using the text SSML in the response? And we are not using the text SSML in the response, Leonard, at least in the case of the end-to-end testing. We do actually take the audio that comes directly from Alexa, and that could be because you typed in text and that's being transformed into the Alexa voice, or you might have your own recorded audio in your skill. In either case, we're going to take that audio response and transform it into text, and that's what we are going to be comparing against. So we are dealing with that actual spoken response that's coming from Alexa. So great question there.
So okay, so I've got my shell of a French test. I need to look up a voice ID for a French person. There's French. Let's do Mathieu. Change this. Need to change the locale to French. And then I can just go in and I can actually change, each of these spoken utterances and what the results should be. I can change them to French. And so, I know a little French. So instead of open llama facts, it's anecdote de llama. And to say, voici votre anecdote. And then asking for a quote directly. That one is demande. It's actually the A with a little accent, which I have saved here because I don't remember how to type it in. So it's demande anecdote de llama de me donner une anecdote. And it should say, same thing, voici votre anecdote. Asking for a fact a different way. In this case, I can say, demande anecdote de llama de me trouver une info. And then I've got ask for help. So ask for help could be demande anecdote de llama. Let's say vous It says you can say, give me a fact. Need another accent here. The U with a little accent. Say, give me a fact, or you can say stop. All right. So I'm going to run that test. Let's go back to the llama ones. I'm just going to run that French one, and we'll let that go. And so while that one's running, so this was to, I went from English to French. I don't speak any other languages, but I could go and very easily use Google Translate or talk to somebody on my team who maybe isn't a tester, maybe is not even a technical person at all on one of the teams, but does speak the language, and get their assistance to be able to just write these tests once. And then I, as a tester who only speaks the one language natively or non-natively, have the ability to really exercise all of that functionality. But even within just English, for example, I can go and I can copy this test, and I'll paste it again. And I can make it, instead of US English, I can make it Australian English. I'm not going to do an Australian accent because it's really, really terrible. But same thing, I have to come in here and I say, instead of US English, I say it's Australian English. I got to look up a voice ID for Australian English. Let's see. Oops. Russell. Let's use Russell. And there we go. And then now I have a test that is ensuring that somebody in Australia, someone who has a native Australian English accent, would have the same kind of experience as somebody who has a native US English accent. And I can do that for British English. I can do it for a wide array of different languages, of different accents, even within that same language. Same on the French side. Continental French and Canadian French are very, very different. I don't need to have either of those accents to be able to effectively test it in the same manner that somebody who natively speaks those languages would be able to interact with it. And what's interesting is the test should be almost done, but I'm going to come back here and look in my Alexa history. And so, this really is sending real audio to these voice platforms. It's capturing the real audio back from these voice platforms. And so I can actually come in and see in my history that, like in this case, it said, demande à anecdote des lamas de me trouver une info. I can actually
demande à anecdote des lamas de me trouver une info.
And see, it's a much better accent than I'm capable of saying. But it's fascinating to be able to see again that there's no mystery, there's no secret here. It really is real audio being spoken to each of these platforms.
Yeah, I mean that's really so interesting to hear those actual audio samples, and I think that's a fantastic demonstration, Emerson. It's a good segue just to show you some of our more advanced tooling, because as you look at these different scenarios, you may be asking yourself, well, gee, I would like to run through with all these different accents and to try all these different speech scenarios and do that in an easy way. And you might start using our Endtoend testing tools to do that. That's initially how we did it. But we have since added a product that's specifically for that purpose that we call usability performance testing. And I'm just going to quickly show you guys how that works. So this is our usability performance tester. It's relying on the same underlying technology that we use for our end-to-end testing. We have these virtual devices that can use either generated audio or recorded audio to test your skills, but and actions as well. But it has a really critical distinction, which is that with the end-to-end testing, we're really doing full system or regression testing. Here, we're just focusing on your interaction model or your intent model. And essentially, we are throwing away, sorry, had a phone call come in. We are throwing away the code, and we're ignoring what's happening in the code and just really trying to optimize your interaction model as best as possible. So in this case, we're testing a skill that I created. It's called Classic Movie Must. It asks people questions about classic movies. This is a report that we did for that, checking in all the slot values for answers. This is a pretty simple skill in that there's only about 16 slot values. But we run those through, and similar to what Emerson was just showing you, but in a more industrial strength way, we take these different slot values and we try saying them, each one 6 different ways. So in this case, where the question is, who was the star of Raging Bull? We have utterances saying, is it De Niro? The answer is De Niro. Just De Niro without any leading phrase there. De Niro, voiced by Miguel, which is a Spanish language voice. Sorry, buddy. Screen turned up there. ZU, which is a Chinese accented voice. And then we use EN US WaveNet D, which is very friendly named. But that's actually a Google text-to-speech voice that actually sounds really amazing. And our tool just automatically runs through all these phrases, runs them through in these different variations, and then gives you a report on how it performed. And it shows you where there are problems. And in this initial run, we see performance results that are fairly typical of what we see with skills, usually between 75 to 85% on a first run. And the types of problems that we fix in those first couple of runs is configuration issues. Like, for example, we just had Robert De Niro in our interaction model and not the name De Niro. So that's a pretty simple fix, but an important one. And so when we go ahead and add that in and run it again, on our second run, we got better performance, but we're still seeing that it's coming back with different values, essentially these homophones for the name De Niro. De Niro and De Niro as a single word. And this sort of homophone management, the combination of configuration and homophone management, just by making those changes, you can really make a huge impact on the skill. So we're going to go back, we take these homophones, we add them into our interaction model, we add them in as synonyms. We run it again, and now it's working perfectly. Now, for a more complex interaction model, I would not set your sight at getting it to 100% accuracy. That's not typically possible if it's even reasonably sophisticated what you're doing with your interaction model or your intent model. But just by doing that sort of configuration, typos, homophones, adding those pieces in and making those little fixes, you can expect to get to between 95 to 99% accuracy. At least that's typically what we see with our customers. And that's a huge improvement. If you think about a skill that starts, something like 80% accuracy, if you get it up to 95, what that means is that you've cut down on your error rate for your users by 75%. 75% less errors is really a big change for users, especially where any error can feel somewhere between an annoyance to sort of a catastrophic failure when it misunderstands people. So those benefits are really quite significant and very tangible for your user base. And if you want to go beyond that, which we do think people should do this, it's not that not necessarily for every customer, but if you want to get into the high 90s, better than 99% range, which we think is really ideal, there's advanced tuning techniques that you can apply as well. You can use things like dynamic entities, use the dialogue interface, use the context on the Google intent model. There's a variety of different tuning techniques that we see. We actually very frequently provide advice on that to really get it to even a better experience for your customers. So this is a really great tool to take advantage of. One of the things I would just highlight with it is this is a turnkey solution. If you do want to take advantage of our usability performance testing, all you need to do is send us your interaction model or your intent model, and we can get started creating these nice reports for you. So really helpful thing there. The other piece that Emerson touched upon was I have to change my screen sharing here again. The continuous testing. And, if you followed along in the presentation, you saw the creation of the test scripts, very straightforward setting those up. In order to set up our monitoring, which we also refer to as the continuous testing, you can just cut and paste one of those test scripts. I did that here. I took it from the test file that Emerson sent to me. I paste it in here, I save it, and then I click Enable Monitoring. And with that, we're going to run this test every 30 minutes. We're going to notify you if there are any problems. We'll send you a summary on a weekly basis. You can look at nice reports in our dashboard. It's really that easy to get set up with your monitoring. So this is a way that investment you make in creating your end-to-end test, you can benefit from it in a number of different ways, and that you can use that same test for doing this ongoing monitoring to give you peace of mind that your skill really is working correctly on an ongoing basis. I know I went through those items fast. We wanted to keep the focus on the unit end-to-end testing, but we do want you to know that this sort of additional tooling is available. And so once you get started with us, these are other great things to also use. And I guess with that, we are actually right at the hour. We do want to leave some time for questions. I know some of you probably have to drop off, but if you do have questions, we're happy to answer them now. So I see Andre asks, is there an integration with CI/CD tools other than yours? Absolutely. So we work with pretty much every CI/CD tool out there, and pretty much have worked with all of them. We most commonly see Jenkins, but we ourselves use a lot of Travis and Circle CI. We have nice examples for many of these CI/CD tools. Let's see. I think we have your email. I might just follow you afterwards. We can just shoot you an email and just send you some of those samples around how we do it. Doing your basic unit testing and end-to-end testing as part of a CI/CD process, it's really just a few lines of code, which is another great benefit. You make this investment in creating your automated tests, then you can time into CI/CD with a minimal effort and get that much more benefit because you have this assurance from things being run on this continuous basis. Yes, I see. Guy, thank you. You take the polls. It's really helpful. Still happy for any questions. I will just say, so Emerson's been here now for almost exactly 30 days, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's been more than 60 minutes to do the end-to-end testing. But do you feel like we're over-promising people and that they can get set up in 60 minutes?
Was that a question for me or for the audience?
That's for you. Well, the audience too, I guess.
No, I think again, I mean the installing Node.js, installing Bespoken tools takes a few minutes. If you have a skill that you're familiar with today already, that that your organization is developing, that you're trying to do the manual testing, I think within an hour you will have you can make your life so much easier. You can remove, if not immediately remove all of the time that you have to spend doing manual testing. You can remove some of the tedium and focus more on critical tasks, perhaps for immature functionality or for for testing on physical devices or things like that. The ability again to get this rapidly set up, not just for yourself, but like you mentioned in your CI/CD pipeline, can be done this afternoon.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think also, 60 minutes, you're not going to write a comprehensive regression test typically. And that's kind of an important point as well, in that, I can tell you how, in terms of I approach testing, because I do a lot of testing. I really do believe in it. I don't start trying to automate everything. I mean, overall, we have a philosophy, and I have a philosophy of automating everything, but that's not on day one. On day one, I write a few tests. I write a few unit tests. Maybe I write a couple end-to-end tests, and I have those in my back pocket. And then I'm, balancing that with some manual testing. But then over time, I'm adding to it. So that first hour, depending on where you are in your life cycle, that may be exactly the right amount of time to spend, because you're getting started and you're on your way. And you build on it over time.
Especially if you're identifying, if you know from manual testing that there is some kind of defect that might take some time to exercise manually, or because of the natural characteristics of your voice, maybe it's a challenge to reliably get that error to show up. You can pretty rapidly write a test that is going to expose the error. And then when the test starts passing, then that the error has been actually fixed by your developers. And that in the future, if the test starts failing again, that some sort of change has been introduced that compromised whatever fix you put in.
Yeah. The bugs stay dead. All right, I don't see more questions, so I guess we'll kind of wrap up here. I think this has been a great session. I